Hey guys, this is miicrow. I wanted to do a quick news roundup for the next New World season. So the next New World season is going to be featuring a few artifacts that we have talked about in the past. Most of these aren't super impactful. There's like one or two that were look to be somewhat of standouts, but the other big thing that is coming is this new seasonal world. I think that in general, the seasonal worlds will be very good for the game in terms of longevity because it fixes a lot of fundamental issues with New World. But this first one seems, from an overall like preview perspective, from what I've seen, to be not quite there. But I think it's heading in the right direction, and we'll go through this and talk about why. So we have the Season of Conquerors Seasonal World PvP Deep Dive. So greeting adventurers, New World Eternum is ushering in a bold new era of gameplay with the introduction of seasonal worlds. These limited time worlds feature unique rule sets, with the first iteration having an always on PvP configuration, accelerated leveling, and exclusive rewards. Here's an inside look to what makes these worlds a game changer. So apparently this article has a bunch of bugs too, so in terms of like its grammar and stuff, so I'm trying not to read over them too much, but their idea for this is that once you hit level 15 or you choose a faction, so either one of those, then you're immediately going to be flagged up for PvP the whole time. So this will make it so that everything that you do will have some sort of combat mechanism involved. You can effectively use the PvP XP boost that they talked about to help boost leveling to some extent, although I think it's still going to be primarily story driven. It's not going to be primarily driven from the PvP side, but at least we'll have a kind of more PvP oriented open world experience. So the first iteration of the seasonal worlds is going to be when you reach level 15 or choose a faction, you're going to be flagged. This design encourages open world conflict and strategic decision making, while new Ethereal and Conqueror's gear amplify the stakes with their drop on death mechanics. So these gear pieces, they give us a little bit of a snapshot of, and they tend to be in line with, I'd say, the power level of artifacts. I'd say that they aren't necessarily better than artifacts and aren't necessarily better than a standard gear piece, but they are intended to be more powerful than standard gear pieces in artifacts. But beyond rewards, the seasonal worlds offer something deeper, a fresh and exhilarating way to experience the game. It's a chance to test your mettle in an environment where every encounter is charged with risk and every decision carries weight. Because if you die and you have this gear, you lose it, right? So the thrill of diving into an ever-changing world where strategy, skill, and adaptability reign supreme can be its own reward. That being said, when you drop to craft this gear, you are going to have to do some PvE, so it's not just a complete PvP experience, right? The idea behind this kind of game mode is sort of like how Albion works from an MMO perspective, where New World has a fundamental issue where once you get geared out, there's no reason to get new gear unless you want to do new sets, right? And to get geared out is fundamentally really expensive. The way that this is balanced is that it might be easier to get geared out, but if you die in certain environments, then you're going to lose all your stuff. I think the question is will you be able to use this gear? Like, say I die in OPR, say I die in 3v3, say I die in a war. These are questions that we don't really have answers for. Like, what happens to your gear then? Can you even participate in those modes? Like, there's just like so many like little niche things that I think that they need to answer, and because it did not have a dev video alongside this, I think this was going to make the experience a lot more confusing for players. And although I think the vision is good, I think this is a really cool thing to test, and I think seasonal's smart for New World because New World doesn't really have more content to span once a year than like for a seasonal content event. So like once a year, New World drops a big patch. About a month and a half later, there's not much to do typically. And I think this will help kind of create a little bit more content between those seasons. Getting on to the rest of this, they talk about some challenges of implementing this. So it's like this wasn't as easy as flipping a switch. It requires rethinking the server architecture and gameplay systems from the ground up. I feel like that's a little bit overstated to some degree, but it is different. So New World when it first came out was a survival based game, so it's basically like trying to go back to those roots. A robust safety net ensures items like Ethereal and Conqueror's gear remain exclusive to seasonal worlds, preventing disruption to Eternum's economy. So when at the end of the day, when you leave this world and you go into when the seasonal world gets merged into a normal world, the gear that you get that is really unique and really powerful will no longer be there. For those who already have 4 characters, don't worry, an additional character slot will be added with the seasonal worlds. Okay, what happens when the seasonal world is gone, though? Do you merge that character? Like, I have 4 characters right now. Seasonal world ends. Does that character that I just made get merged into one of those new servers, or do I get a transfer token to go between regions because they removed those from the game? So, like, there's little questions like that where they're not answering, where they really need to elaborate on this more. For gameplay systems, we wanted to revisit a risk versus reward gameplay loop. Yeah, we already kind of talked about that a bit. Let's see if there's anything else here worth highlighting, or if we can kind of skip to the fun stuff. Ethereal and Conqueror items drop on death and have durability. Conquerors, which they removed durability from the game recently, so that's something that's kind of noteworthy for anyone that's like thinking about returning. Conqueror's items lose much more durability on death compared to Ethereal items. I believe the Conqueror ones are like artifact level, and Ethereal are just like cheaper but good gear. Ethereal and Conqueror's items are stronger than other items. Weapons have an increased base damage of around 20%. Okay, that's noteworthy. Did not read that the first time. Armor and jewelry add 3% damage per absorption per piece, and because of these changes, no gems could be added to these items. So you can't add gems, but the weapons give you a passive 20%, and the jewelry gives a passive 3%. So the concern here is from an ult charge perspective, this actually could be considered to be a nerf from a weapon perspective. So like if you were to put in a gem, because you can't put a gem in these, and you had a rune glass in there, you'd get ult charge not twice as fast, but I'd say like probably a third faster, like 1.3 times faster, and you would be doing like about 10% more damage on average, like 10 to 15% more damage. So is it worth that like 5 to 10% damage boost for something that dies when you drop? Like I would argue not necessarily. The jewelry being 3% damage absorption per piece that's universal is really good, but for some weapons you already hit the damage absorption cap of 50%, so this actually is also not useful. So I think depending on what class you play, the Ethereals and Conquerors items may or may not be useful. For example, if I'm playing tank right now, I really regularly, if I have my shield up, can hit the 50% damage absorption cap. So having that extra 3% literally does nothing, and it just breaks when it dies. So there's no reason for me to run that whatsoever. Ethereal items can give players access to Wrath Stones, which are used to craft powerful Conquerors items. So that confirms what we thought earlier. The Ethereal is a little bit less powerful than Conquerors. Though Wrath Stones also drop on death, the only way to create or generate Wrath Stones will be through wearing specific ethereal gear while farming elite points of interest, darkness breaches, and gathering resources. So this is basically, you wear the gear that drops on death, you do PvE, and while doing that, you gather Wrath Stones that could be used for PvP, but if you're killed while doing that, someone else can take your gear. So ultimately, this is going to help create that system where you have to like be more prone to being in that open world environment, and it will be interesting to see how stuff kind of pans out. I imagine if people are going out farming, they're going to not be doing it as much solo anymore. They're going to be doing it in groups, and that presents some sort of like balance changes. The one spot where I think the underrated spot where this actually can create a pretty good system is with that PvP island. Because like say I'm a solo player, right, and I don't have a group, I can, in theory, this is totally not the case with how it was actually implemented, but in theory, you can go to the PvP island as a solo player, don't want to be able to team up on you, and you'd have like a fair 1v1 fight. The reality is there will be probably groups of people swarming the PvP island because it's the best spot to gather in terms of an efficiency standpoint. So I'll probably go back to teaming on an FFA environment, which still was never fixed. So it's like, I like the idea behind this. It's just, I don't know if I completely trust well, it would be a fool to trust the execution of the New World team, but it's like you can't really trust that this is going to be implemented completely correctly. This sounds really fun from like a kind of a group perspective. Like if say you have a company and you want to go do stuff in open world, like say you're part of the musket union, you want to go do stuff in open world, that could be really fun. But if you're a solo player being hunted by 50 muskets, or you're being hunted by the musket union, this sounds like it could be miserable. I imagine that there will not be a ton of balancing around this. Albion has a lot of systems that help balance around this. For example, what Albion does is it will show you if there's large groups in an area, and it will show you approximately where those groups are on a map. Not like specifically, it'll say like, hey, there's a group of at least 40 people in this general area, or hey, there's a group of at least 20 people in this general area, and then you know to like stay away from those as a solo player. There's nothing like that in New World, so you're gonna actually have to use your eyes. You're gonna have to scout a bit. It's gonna be a little bit more ratty, but there are rewards for being able to kind of gather these items. So it's like, I think this is a pretty cool balance to get to those Conquerors items. It's just I'm not sure if it's actually going to be as inviting from a solo or like minimal player perspective to do so. That being said, I do like that New World's actually taking a risk for once and is doing something that might be controversial but might be a lot more fun for the game, and overall I think this is a good change. So ethereal items, when broken down, yield ethereal dust, which you can... Is ethereal dust the wrathstone? No. So ethereal dust is a different thing from wrathstone. So ethereal items get ethereal dust, and then that can probably be used to craft the ethereal items. So you need the ethereal dust to craft ethereal. You need the wrathstones to craft conquerors. And the only way to get wrathstones is if you have ethereal. So you have like a tier system where you need ethereal first, then you use ethereal to get the wrathstones, use the wrathstone to craft the conquerors, and then you use the conquerors, which in theory is supposed to be relatively OP, because these... Well, I guess ethereal is also supposed to be kind of OP because it has the base damage increase and it has the damage absorption increase. It's just in practicality, I'm not sure if it's actually going to be better or not, and they could do stuff with that. I think the really interesting thing that will come down from this is ethereal better than a normal item? Like, should I be going to craft ethereal gear, or should I be trying to rush to craft like 700, 725 gear, and then use that 700, 725 gear to kill ethereal gear players, and then use the stuff that they had on them, so the stuff that they dropped to craft conquers? So the spot where this might not break down to be really nice is if people are able to consistently kill ethereal players without having to kind of have that... what would you call it? Like the fear of losing your gear, and then with that get the conqueror stuff pretty consistently. Like, I could be in theory a group of 5 people that just goes out and hunts ethereal players. Like, that might be the move on one of these servers. I guess time will tell. It'll at least be interesting. So how to obtain ethereal dust: refine wood or fiber, hide and stone into ethereal dust at a refining station. So you take resources and you convert them into ethereal dust. The resource that is the most plentiful in the game and that is really easy to gather is generally hide. That's high level, so you can get T5 hide, for example, and farm it like really fast in some of the end game zones. Generally not super contested because higher level resources tend to be cheaper than base level ones, because the base level ones are used in all the higher level crafts. So you end up needing more of the base level than the end game level stuff, but because there's not a surplus of new players coming into New World, this creates a balance where the new resources tend to be, or like the early game resources tend to be more expensive than the late game ones. So this will help balance that out in terms of the economy perspective. But I imagine there's ones that are way easier to get than others, right? Like T5 ore is like generally a little bit harder to get than like T5 hide. T5 fiber is harder to get than T5 hide. End of the day, though, a lot of these will be located on the PvP island. It'll be interesting if that comes into play, or if people just look for classic farm spots through one of the mapping like software applications. So how to obtain ethereal amethyst. Ethereal amethyst is crafted at refining stones for 100 ethereal dust. Okay, so you craft this at refining stations for 100 ethereal dust. The ethereal dust is used to craft the ethereal items, and then ethereal items are used to get the conqueror's items. I guess there's another part of this was interesting too. It's like ethereal items give players access to wrathstones. Do I need to have 20? Or do I need to have a full set of ethereal gear to get a wrathstone, or could I just have one set? Like, is this like luck based, or like there's so many of these questions that they're just not answering in this article. And they don't have a video to go alongside this that would clear a lot of it up. A primary focus for seasonal worlds is also accessibility and respect for players' time. We want to put players on more equal ground while mitigating some of the grind to engage at high levels quickly. We added the following items to help mitigate these types of issues. All player XP, weapon mastery, and trade skill XP is increased by 25%. I think 25% is honestly really low. it should probably be closer to 50 to 100%. The way that Albion balances this, which I'm going back to Albion a lot because, and I did this before with New World with their PvP Island, because I think Albion, this is the spot where that game is the best at in the MMO kind of genre, and other games should probably be taking feedback from it and like learning from it. What Albion does is, depending on the tier of difficulty of the zone that you're in, you get an increased modifier to XP. So like what that basically means is there's safe zones in Albion, which this probably won't have. And if you're in a safe zone, you have a 0% XP bonus, right? If you're in a Yellowstone or in a yellow zone, that means if you die, you get knocked out for 3 minutes. So you can't do anything for 3 minutes if you die, which is like kind of annoying. But you don't lose any of your gear. If you're in that zone, like say you get like a 25% XP boost. I don't think it's actually 25%, but it's something like that. There's red zones, which red zones are, you die on death, but the difference but you know how many players are flagged up to kill people in a red zone, then you could be flagged or not flagged. So you like kind of have an idea if you are in a spot where you could likely die or not. And then there's black zones where you have no information whatsoever, but you get the biggest bonus rewards. So I wish they had like some sort of scaling system like that, where it's like, say I'm on like Windsward, ever like the starting zones, like the level 15 areas. Like say I'm there. Now I don't have this bonus to XP, but like say I'm more concentrated on that PvP island, you know, like that area maybe has 100% XP boost. So you're like encouraged to go to the PvP island if you want to gain XP. But if you're on the PvP island, you could die more, you'd be more likely to die. So there's like kind of a balance there. They don't do that in this iteration, but that would be kind of something that would be interesting if they figured out a way to add or kind of tap into that, some sort of logic similar to that. We created a new resource called Ethereal Dust. I've already talked about this a bit. The resource can be obtained by refining core resources or by salvaging the gear. The higher the value of the resource or item is, the more dust you get. So T5 hide is probably going to be key. This resource is also the primary way you discover and unlock Conqueror's gear through crafting recipes by crafting ethereal ammonus. So you unlock new Conqueror's gear crafting recipes by crafting the ethereal gear. So like a box that you get or a percent chance, again, something that they don't really touch on, but it would be nice if they did. All ethereal gear has a level 15 requirement, and Conqueror's gear has a level 20 requirement to use. That means if you manage to kill someone and take their gear and you have powerful friends, you can be competitive even at the lower levels with the right gear. Oh no. For people that paid attention to New World within the last, like, I'd say 12 months, there's been no, it's longer than 12 months at this point, but there's been an ongoing issue where lower level players, so this applies to gear too, but if you have lower level items, they actually give an inherent power boost. So if you're able to equip endgame gear at lower levels, the earlier level players will inherently have a bigger power boost than the endgame level players. The question will come down to, do the stat increases you gain by leveling outweigh the damage that you gain by being a lower level? And in the past, the answer to that was yes. Being a lower level was actually advantageous, especially in game modes like OPR or like 3v3, where all your gear was automatically upscaled. But that would be the interesting question that I would bet a lot on the AGS is not QA tested. So that will be interesting if you can clip the low level gear, if you'll actually be better than an end game level gear with the same equivalent set. Ethereal gear is considerably cheap to craft and has a high gear score at every tier. The crafting cost for ethereal items is half the material cost of the same tier item equivalent. T2 ethereal items are gear score 350, T3 600, T4 700, T5 or 725. Okay, so that kind of addresses some of the concerns of 3. So if it is locked out by this, I'm guessing that like if you have to be level 15 for ethereal, that's going to correspond to T2. Maybe this level 725, you have to be level 65 or something like that. So that actually does most likely solve the issue I'm concerned about. The mount skin is automatically unlocked. Oh, the other concern about this though, if I'm going to be real, you could speedrun the entire campaign, get to level 65 in about 10 to 12 hours of the old thing. So it's like, as much as I would like, and it would be really interesting to see in the first couple days to see people engaged in like this T2, T3, T4 content, but most people, I'm guessing, will speedrun to T5, get the T5 gear, And then I wouldn't say it's guaranteed, but I'd say there's going to be at least 5 to 10% of players that kind of abuse people that are flagged but don't have the gear and just keep killing them. So there could be a spot where it's like there's a main story quest in Weaver's Fen, for example, that during the fresh start everyone had to wait in line for because it was something you had to manually interact with that gets spawn camped to some degree, and that kind of creates a bit of conflict. I think that's actually good though for this kind of environment. Like you need that's the kind of the point of the PvP servers. You have to figure out how to get around that conflict, and it'll be interesting. But I could see problems kind of coming from this as well. The mount skill is automatically acquired at level 15 without having to do a quest. Craft your first mount and special ethereal mount food at any camp to get riding ASAP. You could also obtain a higher level mount straps and horseshoes from ethereal animus. Cool, but I guess that means that they'll go away, but that's cool. I like that change. The Heart Rune Eclipse slot is unlocked by default. I feel like this should just be a thing in general. I don't know why it's not a thing. Without having to do the quest, you should have a chance to earn top tier heart runes from consuming ethereal animus. You will still need to be though you will still need to be. Is that though or that is though? They did type that right. Though you will still need to be level 65 to equip these. Okay. So you can get them early, but you can't use them still until you're 65. I feel like it should be lower than that. Rewards of progression. Let's just skip to the gear. I want to stop going through like the bureaucracy stuff. Like we've kind of looked at the gear. You have to get ethereal first, then you get the conquerors. They have some examples of conquerors weapons. These are supposed to be super OP. They're the equivalent of like relics in Albion. They should be about the equivalent of artifacts in New World in terms of power level. Probably they should be better than artifacts though. So we have two examples. We have the Crescent Wave Greatsword. The Crescent Wave unique ability, while above 50% health, heavy attacks consume 20 mana to create a wave projectile forward. So I'm guessing you shoot it forward when you do an attack while you're above 50% health. It's a little bit off grammatically. Dealing 150% weapon damage. Okay, so this is a projectile that's doing 150% weapon damage. That is hitting for obviously a lot. The questions will be, how far does this projectile go? Greatsword, typically, if you had an endgame level Greatsword, it could hit for about 6,000 to 10,000. So this will be likely hitting for about 10,000, I'm guessing, on average, which is obviously a lot. You would likely be able to dodge just because you'd be able to see the wave coming at you, but it depends on the wave speed if this is going to be really strong or not. It has refreshing move. Noteworthy, if you hit somebody with the wave thing, because this is a generated effect, this would, in theory, not proc refreshing move. So your light and heavy attacks reduce the active cooldowns by 2.5%. So this is basically a dead perk in my perspective. As Leeching Crosscut, this kind of makes sense because you have to be above 50% HP to use Crescent Wave. This, honestly, from these two perks alone, this is almost worse than Serenity already. It has Trenchant Strikes, though, which helps out a lot, so your heavy melee attacks do 23% damage. Serenity is really close to this in terms of power level. I think Serenity, in my opinion, would be a little bit better because Balanced Blade is consistent damage, Trenchant Crits is consistent damage, and you don't have to have this above 50% threshold. So in my opinion, this Greatsword is worse than Serenity, but because Serenity is so difficult to acquire, it actually might be used a bit more. So I think this will actually see some play. We got the Yeaterson's Warhammer. It yeets people. They really went with that terminology. Okay. So 400% push distance, so it's like the old clear out, and 30% base damage to all Warhammer knockbacks. Clear out will ignite the first target hit, turning them into a projectile, causing 150% damage to all enemies they pass through. So it's basically launching somebody, and if they hits people, it does a bunch of damage to the other people. In theory, this is pretty strong in large scale, but is pretty poor in small to medium scale. So the question is, can you actually use the Conqueror's gear in large scale? Sundering Clear Out, 24% rend, very good perk. Plague Strikes, very good perk. Meta. Refreshing Move, dead perk on a Warhammer. So the balance there, the thing here is it's missing, I think it's Trenchant Strikes is the perk that this is missing. That's really good. normally your third perk here would be Trenchant Strikes with Plague Strikes, and then you have Clear Out. So this is worse than a war. Like, if you're maining your Warhammer and you're using your Warhammer for heavy attacks, this Conqueror's gear is worse than a typical Warhammer. The 20% damage boost is somewhat relevant, but I still think the gem difference makes a normal Warhammer most likely better than this one. And same thing with the Greatsword. It does deal 20% more damage, but because of the gem difference, I don't think it necessarily matters. It will be interesting to see if that. I mean, there is an argument that if they make the 20% coded to the base value damage from the item, it actually may be better to use one of these items than a standard item that's bissed out. But it's looking like a standard bissed out item would be very competitive with the end game gear from this zone. Progression's very fast paced. Yeah, we already talked about this. There's some seasonal rewards. That's kind of interesting. I think one thing that we need to touch on too is there's something in here about a battle pass, right? Conqueror's gear will be converted to gear score 2015 items, while T5 ethereal will be 705. Yeah, but it won't be Conquerors and it won't be ethereal anymore. So like it loses its status and it gets converted to a random piece, I'm guessing. Yeah, this is just replacement items that aren't this. So it's like, this is, I guess the best way to look at the seasonal worlds is this is a great way to get into the game. I believe you do have to purchase a battle pass for some of these rewards. It's somewhere buried in here, but it's just a wall of text and I'm having trouble reading it. Players will be able to earn this trophy first. You claim territories. Okay, it doesn't matter. Yeah, no, I don't see where it is. I know they have something in here where you need to purchase the battle pass to get access to some of the rewards for this, and that will be kind of an interesting dynamic. I think New World needs to figure out more ways to make money, so I think that's like fine, but it would be better if they actually like made good enough skins where they're able to like kind of survive off of that. I don't think New World's really pulling in that kind of money though, so I think that's kind of makes sense. I mean, I think this will be a really cool experiment, really good for new players getting into the game. For veteran players, I would say probably, I mean, it would be an interesting experience. Like, if you want to play through the game again, I don't think it would be a different way to play it. It might be really fun, but I don't know if it's, like, really worthwhile to, like, come back to the game for this kind of update. Like, I think New World needs maybe another update or two before it's, like, really, really interesting. I think this gear, while it's interesting, I don't think it fundamentally fixes the issues of the game. I think it does help address some of the issues where it's like crafting becomes irrelevant at endgame, and this will help with that at least for a temporary basis. And considering these worlds will run for 3 months, those 3 months will probably be pretty action-packed. At least the first month, maybe a month and a half, will be pretty action-packed. So it's definitely something that would be worth trying if you're continuing to play New World. But if you haven't played New World in a long time, it's something that's interesting, but I'd probably wait another season or two for a little bit more content if you just played through the recent content, for something a little bit more to be added before like you consider playing through the game again, because everyone just got through playing through the game once. I think this will be interesting enough to where it might be worth checking out if you're really, really bored, but there's so many other good competitive games on the market right now that I don't know if this is enough to persuade players to necessarily come back. The other perspective about this too, these Conqueror's weapons, these effects are really, really cool, but like these are on par with the Scorpion Sting effects, right? And like that's what the baseline for artifacts should have been, in terms of like these artifacts provide unique effects. Like, why isn't there an artifact that's like, hey, I take 30% more damage, but the allies around me take 30% less damage or something like that? Like, why isn't there like something like unique there with armor? Why is it just, hey, you become more tanky, hey, you deal more damage? Why is every artifact like that? Like, there needs to be something more creative here. And these are really creative effects, and this is really good, but like this should have been the standard for artifacts, and I don't know why this was abandoned as a standard for artifacts, because it makes artifacts so much more, like they're so much less appealing. Like I don't really know why they messed that up, but I mean, at least they're trying to rectify it. These will be kind of interesting. I don't know if I'm going to be checking this out, but for people that were looking for an opinion, it will be at least good for new players. I think players that are continuing to play the game should probably try this, because there's not going to be other content for you to really interact with. But if you haven't played the game in a while, I wouldn't say this is enough to really move people to come back to. With that being said, I'll see you guys later.